Intro time. Okay. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Safari Pedal Show. I'm your host, Abby. If this is your first time here, welcome to the Crazy Wild Safari Pedals podcast zoo thing. Bandwagon, I'm out of air. It's great to have you guys here. I'm so stoked for today's episode because Tristan Hoogland is going to be hopping on the podcast today. He's an awesome engineer, mixer. He has a lot of awesome records under his belt. We are going to be diving into a plethora of topics, from his approach to work-life balance, acoustics, as well as advice that he has for up-and-coming producers and engineers. I am really stoked to dive in, so without further ado, let's do the thing. So guys, please give a very warm welcome to Tristan Hoogland. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Abby. So nice to meet you. So nice to do this. I appreciate you reaching out.
Thank you so much for hopping on. Before we dive in to all the good stuff, let's start with who you are, what you do, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, sounds great. My name's Tristan Hoogland. I'm a mixing engineer and audio engineer based in LA, formerly, as you can tell, from Australia. I started getting into music as I was playing in bands. A lot of the usual things sort of started when I was like 14 or whatever, and maybe younger. You know, sort of fast forward, I got into university. I actually auditioned as a guitar player thinking that would be my road to musical success. But even the university, or when the people who, the judges will say, the professors, they were like, well, we like your playing. We think you're good. But this portfolio you submitted, which I thought everybody had to do, I just recorded something in Audacity. They're like, we actually think this is better. So if you want, we'll admit you under a production course. And so I was like, whatever, yeah, I'll say yes to that. So it turns out other people kind of had a earlier instincts maybe for what I would have been better at. And so I got really into it. I was still playing in bands and things, and I just became really obsessed with the studio stuff. And I'd sort of racked up hundreds of hours in the studios at the university in my free time, recording bands, etc. Really got obsessed. And so I was living in Brisbane at the time in Australia, and then did that for a few years. I worked at a major studio there through the university, then moved to Melbourne, did some more stuff there in one of their biggest studios called Sing Sing, and I really cut my teeth there for a minute. I'd always had this desire to move to America, really unique goal, I realize. And yeah, it bothered me for years, like probably like the best part of like 10 years. I was like 30 at this time, 29, 30. I really had a lot of trouble just not letting this thought go. It was like, I have to move to America or something. I will not be happy until I've tried to do the America thing. It's kind of like, maybe people inside of America don't get it, but America's quite a, from the outside, it's so glitzy and full of success and the answers to a lot of things that I think are problematic or in your way as an audio engineer outside of that. There's less economy, I guess, outside. And I moved here about 7 years ago, ended up working at Future Classic, the record label, like working through them and their studio sort of as their in-house guys. So Future Classic, they have like Flume and they had Chet Faker and Flight Facilities, a lot of those sort of cool electronic artists. And so I was in-house there for a few years. COVID hit. I got into meeting a few different people around town, and I started working with a label called 88 Rising, and that kind of was a pretty pivotal moment where I worked on like a few sort of like interludes for Joji on his on his Nectar record. That just kind of led to mixing like 7 or 8 of the tracks on that record, and then that came out and did some pretty remarkable things, certainly for him, but also fortunately as a side effect for my career. And it kind of just sort of put me into focus as not just an audio engineer just trying to bop around LA, trying to make it work. Like I really wanted to do mixing and trying to get that first record that's going to kind of put you on the map. You need at least a couple of those, and so yeah, that one really helped. And I think since then I've just been in LA, and it's been a pretty wild ride focusing on that.
What a journey through. Before we pop the camera on, you said a line, I can't quote it exactly back, so maybe you can help me, but it was something along the lines of something that's really important to you is finding balance between life and music, which is a topic that I feel like is rarely discussed, like on these types of audio content platforms. So I'd love to hear like your whole kind of philosophy and like I think
Mm.
maybe ethos.
Yeah, that's great. I really became quite fascinated with the concept of what having a life in music looks like. I think everybody at a certain point in their career realizes if I'm going to do this long term, I have to really come up with a bit of a strategy if I want other things in my life. That could be relationships, it could be family, it could be other hobbies, whatever it is. Like it could be just quality of sleep. It doesn't really matter what it is. I think a lot of people eventually hit that point, and I certainly did. So, I'd moved when I moved to the US. I had nothing. I had no equipment. I had a laptop and an Apollo and some headphones. And so but in Australia, I had like, probably thousands of dollars worth of outboard equipment, full studio worth. I had to really make do with the limitations that I had. Like I had a laptop just running around LA and I got quite good at it, and I started realizing there was so much you could do just in the computer alone, and you didn't really need a massive amount of outboard and things to get that to work. The other part of it was too is I was working in studios and doing a lot of mixing, and that was great. But then what would usually happen is you're working in the studio, you're doing your mix, you send it off, and this might be like 7 p.m. and or 6 p.m. doesn't matter what it is. And you would send that off, and you would get, you'd wait around. Am I going to get some notes tonight? Or there's a deadline apparently, but I don't know. It's been 2-3 hours. It's 9 p.m. here. I don't know if I want to stay here any longer. And so you're sort of trapped in like staying at the studio. And if you've got a partner, you're trying to be, oh, I'll be home. I said I'd be home at 7, but it's now 9, and I'm sort of waiting. And you're kind of failing your partner, you're failing yourself. And, I just sort of started realizing, why do I need to be in the studio so much for these things? And so, like I had a dedicated studio computer that I was using, and a pretty, not a such great laptop. But I was like, man, the dream for me would be having 2 computers that are identical. So what I could do is I could do that mix. I could finish at 3 p.m. if I need to, but then I could go home, set up the identical rig, and be able to put my headphones on and turn the hi-hat up or whatever, if that's what the change is. And what that sort of did to me was really unlock the ability to have a good, like, healthy life outside of that. Like, I think people were far more flexible knowing that I could make changes at home. So not only am I more available on my own terms, ideally, but I'm also sort of more present for other parts of my life. And I think that was really, that became so important to me. And I think the more I realized having outboard equipment and other things where you're fully locked to your studio, where you can't move from it, you can't make any changes unless you're there. And even when you remote in, like, which I've done plenty of times, that has its own sort of delay challenges and latency challenges that become frustrating. Working natively is always the better, more efficient option. I just realized it slowed me down. Like if something blows a tube and like I'm mixing with it, like my life is kind of on hold. The mix is, I might have to like spend more hours at the studio. I can't just go home and play fetch with my dog. And it stopped making sense.
Also, before we pop the camera on, you mentioned that this is something that we've never like dove into on the podcast, that you're really into like acoustics. Like
I can definitely get deep on that.
Yeah, I would love to hear
sure.
like kind of your, I guess, intro to when you became fascinated with it and kind of what, your whole also like approach, philosophy, opinions.
So I'm very passionate about acoustics. Yeah, this studio in here, I've been in here for maybe 5 years, maybe 4. And I've done, I'll say 1.5 renovations on it. Acoustically. I did, which the last one about a year ago, I did 3 months. It was pretty much entirely, if not entirely, all acoustic focus. So I certainly have worked in a lot of compromised rooms. I think one of the biggest challenges when you work in a compromised room is like you really just can't mix what you can't hear. And until you've worked in a room where low end is being produced really well and there's a lot of resolution there and you haven't got notes ringing out into the seconds, you really don't know what kind of adjustments you really need to make. And so I think when when I finally got some hours in some good rooms, you really start realizing how much you're missing out on. So I became quite obsessed with this over the years. I'd been part of a pretty significant, the university I worked at way back. This is like another life. They did a massive studio build, like multi complex thing. And they had like the best acousticians in the world come in. And so I learned a lot through like someone else's big budget build of just like things that were happening there. And then out here, there's this guy named Rory who's quite a kind of the god, the S tier acoustician around town. He also has a lot of great knowledge. My friend Sean, he's also somebody who really did a lot of research into this. And I just started becoming really obsessed with it. I started realizing if I could hear properly, I can eliminate the aspect of the room from my crap mixes. You know what I mean? It's just that sort of thing of like, I don't want to have to blame anyone other than myself that day for why it didn't work out. And so I think when I got into acoustics, it's very important to have a lot of sort of things set up properly. And, a lot of people sort of get, foam on the walls and stuff. They don't really treat anything. I have like 3 feet of trapping back behind there. And then the ceiling's also about 2 feet of trapping, the entire ceiling. And then the side walls are full of maybe 9-inch of rock wool. And, these are all starting to work at frequencies closer to that sort of 100 hertz area. Once you start getting a lot more control and, uniform response across the reverb time, you start being able to like identify frequency problems a lot easier. And you stop doing that thing where you over process. I think we were talking earlier or maybe even on email, but one of the questions was, what are some of what sets a great engineer apart from a good engineer? And one thing that I know is if you can't hear properly, often what you have this tendency to over process. So you want to distort basses and things all the time, and you want to like crank a lot of EQs in the low end to hear more low end. But you're actually what's possibly happening is you just can't hear it properly. If you can hear it properly, you might just make 2 EQ moves and in like 2 elements, and you've probably fixed the mix. And that's probably one of the biggest things that I had to unlearn a lot. Like 90% of my sessions have like 1 EQ plug-in on all the tracks, maybe some vocal stuff and low end stuff on bass and kick, but yeah, when you have a really good room that performs reasonably well, you're going to start making far more precise and less decisions, I think, which is really cool.
That's so interesting. And was there like a particular like event that got you really interested and kind of made you realize that, oh, this can be like a really big thing? Or was it just like something over time that like an interest that happened?
I'd start because when it's kind of sad when you first start out, and if you go through the more traditional big studio process of learning, it's kind of a little bit wasted on you in some small way how great. I mean, some of those rooms can be challenging, but how great those rooms usually sound. So you could be in a really good room, like maybe a multi-million-dollar studio, with great acoustics or good enough acoustics, and it's not usually until then. Usually what happens is you leave that system and then you go into your own bedroom or you hire like a janky room and you put some speakers in there and you throw up some random panels and you're just like, why does this sound so crap? Why is this so hard to work in? And then obviously you can adapt to these things, and over time, like that does happen. It's like you can get used to a room. And that's important too. But I think I then went back into working when I think I came out here and I started working in Future Classic, because I was working out of there for about 2 years, and they had a really good room. Loved that room. So I'd been working there for 2 years, and by this point, I think I'd really clued on. I'm like 30, 31, probably year 8 or something, and maybe year 10 into my career at that point. So I kind of knew the importance of a good room, but it wasn't until after that I went into this room because a friend grandfathered me in, and I was like, oh wow, this is not easy. And I had like a pair of ATC like 50s and stuff, and it was like a good setup, but that was such a sobering and humbling moment. And I was like, I need to learn how to do this proper. And so then I tried to like go back into my notes from when I was working at the university and asking around and researching. And there's not a lot of great information online. There's a lot of conflicting information online. So you really have to do a lot of testing. This was all exposed, rock wool falling off the ceiling. I'm also the son of a carpenter, so I'm quite handy in doing a lot of these things. But yeah, I did a lot of testing, like sweeps and sweeps and sweeps and sweeps and sweeps, and like learning about membrane absorbers, which are effectively tuned. So if you have like a problem at like 60 hertz, like where there's a massive modal either peak or dip, you can build these absorbers that just target those frequencies, which is usually very helpful in low end control. But yeah, I just had to learn. And sadly, to really pull off to even get to a decent starting point with a good room, you really have to treat probably a good third of it. So if you take your shell, if you think of a room that you're in, you might have to treat like a whole third of it just to get into like a reasonable space. So think about how a third of, and that's like a really big thing with acousticians. If they design studios, people want them always to have more space, but you start sacrificing the sonic performance. And that's kind of the reality of it. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, most definitely. It made me realize I need to do like a deep dive myself into the topic and just kind of like get educated. This podcast in general is centered around being new, being up and coming. Do you have any pieces of advice specifically for producers and engineers that are just at the very beginning of their career?
It's funny because the scene is definitely quite different now to when I started, and I feel like I hear that all the time from people even, senior to me, talking about what they would recommend. I think the first thing is be a lot more discerning online material. When you know what you're talking about, you start realizing when you go online, there's so much noise. And that's not to criticize anyone trying to do something cool, like whatever, it's great. But, podcasts like this and stuff are really great because you're trying to target people who are working and have experience. And I really try to go with reputable sources of people who are actually working and doing stuff. So I think in terms of absorbing information and learning online, which I think is awesome, definitely try to find more have some critical thinking, check that they're a reputable resource. That's a really big one because I just know people are going to start looking for stuff constantly. One thing that I still maintain, and I wish I had done more of actually, particularly when I moved, because I moved to the US when I was 30, I was in this sort of awkward age bracket, but I really think try find someone to work for. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to start saying people should do things for free. I certainly worked for free for many parts of my career, particularly earlier on, but try to find someone to work for that is actively busy. They could be 5 years ahead of you, 10 years ahead of you. It doesn't really matter, but find someone who's kind of pretty healthily engaged in the industry. And if you can find somebody who's really quite busy and, work with them frequently, try hang in there for as long as you can. A lot of people get quite eager to jump ship and do their own thing. But yeah, a career is very much a marathon. It's not a sprint. And there's so much to learn. I think learning from someone, it's not even about mixing. That'll take care of itself, or audio. It just takes care of itself. Like that stuff, you're just going to get naturally better at. But learning how to, how the music industry works, what's the hierarchy of people at a label? Like, how do you chase an invoice? How do you conduct yourself? Do you pay for the lunches when you go out with people? Yes is the answer. Things like that, you need to be around someone because that's running the business, that's having a career. It's getting good at it's fine. I assume when anyone asks me to mix anything, they know that I assume that anybody else in this town could do that, but they're coming to me for something else. And I think that's more the stuff on the periphery, and you got to learn that from someone. You got to learn what those skills are. Like, how do you be a good studio citizen? How do you conduct yourself? How do you be useful? That's one of my key questions, even to this day. And I remember when I was assistant, the best question you could ask yourself is, how can I be useful? It kind of immediately puts your ego out the door. And I think when you're in those rooms and you're early, you're so hungry to like prove yourself. It's just kind of the wrong angle to come at things from. I think the better question is, how can I be useful? You'll start finding there's no shortage of things to do that.
There are two lines that stuck out, like being a good studio citizen and also how can I be useful? That's such a good, like, I don't know. I really like that approach to like any situation. And it also, like you said, it helps you approach with like a certain humility because it's like you're coming in service of, and it's not like a me kind of, and that energy really comes across, like whether it's like, because it could be a subconscious thing.
Yeah, it sure can. You're so right. And to be honest, you're setting yourself up for success then, because that is what this industry is. It's like, we're in service of making music and service of the people creating it. So it's not like you do your little like, oh, I'm gonna like really do my my sort of servant era of like assisting, and then I'll be able to have my hot takes on everything and people will want to come to me for that. In my experience anyway, that hasn't been the case. It's like I still very much am, so like I'm providing a service, so it doesn't stop after that.
Yeah, absolutely. So to sum up everything we spoke about, I always love to ask our guests to either drop, it can be a piece of advice or just anything general that you want to say to the greater Safari world. So do you have any other things to drop to the people?
Learn how to manage money. That's a pretty big one. This is a very, yeah, I learned that lesson. I had no real decent template or framework for how to budget for my business, my personal life. You know, you can get paid massively in 2 months and then nothing for 4 months. It's like you have to learn how to set yourself up to be able to like sustain the sort of slow cycles, both mentally and fiscally. Because that's the thing. It's like if you're not set up, at least if you're set up fiscally in some small way to sort of weather those storms, you're already halfway there. But the mental part will be a lot more challenging. I do think people don't talk about the business side of this stuff quite as much. I wish there was a lot more literature out there on how to best financially set yourself up for success. And that doesn't mean having, it's just a lot of basic saving principles and things like that, I suppose. But yeah, it's I finding becoming quite disciplined with your money and having a bit of a forecast mindset, I think would be really something that I would encourage.
Wow. So Tristan, thank you so much for hopping on, dropping gems. I thoroughly enjoyed this and I'm very stoked for this episode.
Abby, thanks so much for having me. This is so fun. Let's do it again.
For sure.